Hello, my name is Peter Pringle. In 1980, I was wrongly convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of a police officer in Ireland, a crime which I didn't commit and had nothing whatever to do with. When my sentence was given, I was taken back to the top security prison and put into the death cell, which was quite horrendous. There was no natural light, and the overhead fluorescent lights were on at all times, and I was forced to be in the presence of at least 2 jailers at all times. Shortly before the Christmas of 1980, while sitting in that cell, I overheard 3 jailers discussing what role they might have to play in my execution. They weren't sure whether they would be asked to volunteer or be ordered to do so, but they did feel that they should have to get extra money for the job. And they came to the conclusion when I was being executed, which would have been by hanging, when my body would go down to the trapdoor, there would be 2 jailers underneath, and each one would have to pull one of my legs to make sure my neck was broken. And it illustrates the inhumanity of the death sentence, because even the jailers are badly affected by it. They're instructed not to speak to the condemned prisoner, because if they were to get to know and respect the condemned prisoner, it would be very difficult for them to participate in cold-bloodedly taking that person's life. Shortly after Christmas, I received a card from a lady I didn't know, and still don't know. And she told in the card how on St. Stephen's Day, that's the day after Christmas, she was walking on the shore at Greystones, south of Dublin, grieving for her brother, whose name was Peter, and who had been a seaman and who had died in an accident at sea. And she remembered there was another man named Peter who was facing death, because you see, I had also been a fisherman and I'd been at sea. And so she thought to write to me, and she wrote to me wishing me well and trusting that I would not be executed, and just to let me know she was thinking of me. Now, getting this card from somebody I didn't know, and still don't know, it lifted my heart, and it helped me to overcome the difficulties I was in and to more present myself in my meditations, to distance myself. And in a way, it brought back my humanity to me. I realized that while they could imprison me physically, they could not imprison my mind or my heart or my spirit. And so I determined that I would live within those realms of myself. And then I came to the realization that the very worst thing that they could do to me would be to take my life, to kill me. And to my surprise, I was not afraid to die, but I was afraid that I might die without dignity, that they might succeed in taking away my dignity. And so, in the time I was in prison, I concentrated on studying law and trying to prove my innocence. My sentence was commuted, I should say, to 40 years without any possibility of parole, and I was put out into the general prison population. That's when I started to study law, in a prison where there was no law library, so it was quite difficult and slow and ponderous. I found then I couldn't study because my anger was so great, I just was not able to do so. I knew I had to learn how to relax. Before I ever went to prison, I, many years previously, had read some writings of Peter Kropotkin, who was a very famous Russian anarchist who was imprisoned in the 1900s, early 1900s, 1890s, 1900s. And he wrote, and I paraphrase, that the colour of prisons are grey, but that our visions, memories and imaginations are multicoloured. But that the longer a person is in prison, the colours fade. And if the colours ever fade to the greyness of the prison, then that person is lost. When I was in prison, I determined that that was not going to happen to me. I was very glad I'd read Kropotkin, and I was very glad I had remembered that piece. And so when I had the opportunity to take up painting, I took it. And it was a great pleasure to play with paints and colour and shape, and to attempt to create harmony in an environment of total disharmony. And that brought me great peace of mind, and also it was protecting me against the greyness of my surroundings, and it was keeping colour in my visions and imaginings. And during the time that I was painting, we had a couple of artists came in visiting, and one artist, a lady, Teresa, she brought her dog in, a little terrier in, and she wanted each of us to sketch or paint the dog. So I had the great privilege of having that dog in my painting cell for an hour and a half, and she wanted me to paint it or sketch it. But the little dog I was so overtaken by having this beautiful little animal in the cell with me. I never thought of painting or sketching. I just wanted to talk with the dog, and I did. And I think the dog spoke to me too. And we had a lovely time together, and it was such a treat. So when Teresa came back, I was afraid I had nothing sketched or drawn or painted, but she understood, and the dog went away, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience in a place where there was no natural events, no natural colour, only grey, and total disharmony, to have this beautiful little animal in my presence for an hour and a half. And my anger abated sufficiently that I was able to study law. And that's what I did in the most time I was there. And eventually, in 1992, I opened my case in the High Court in Dublin on my own behalf. I had no money and no lawyer, so I had to represent myself. And after the case ran until May of 1995, when my conviction was overturned, and eventually I was released. And after I got out of prison, I found a great difficulty fitting into society again. But I had the twin disciplines of yoga and meditation, which had helped me in prison, and I used those disciplines to help me again. Now, on the day that I was released from the court and out onto the streets where the media were there and all the journalists and cameras and microphones thrust into my face and questions being thrown at me, it was quite surreal. And then I was taken by my lawyer to this television station for an interview for the news, and afterwards to a big party that was being held for my behalf and my release to celebrate. And everybody was enjoying themselves, but I didn't feel part of it really. And I went to stay with friends that night, and the following morning when I got up out of bed, I went down to the kitchen and out into the back garden, which was very beautiful. And it was a lovely summer's day, and the sun was shining, and the birds were whistling, and there were no big walls around me. And I strolled down the garden till where there was a big old apple tree, and a very beautiful old gnarled apple tree. And as I stood beside the tree with my hand on the trunk, I had the realization that in all the time I'd been in prison, and all the difficulties I'd gone through, this tree was simply growing away in this garden, in like an oasis of peace and nature, while it was producing its fruit and dropping its fruit and shedding its leaves and going through the winter and coming into the spring and producing its leaves again and its fruit again, year after year, in the middle of a big city where there was a hustle and bustle of traffic and people rushing to and fro and greed and avarice, and this tree was totally unaffected by it all. I put my arms around the tree and I wept. And that's when I knew I was actually free.
I basically was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people, and I was present when 2 policemen were killed, and I was in the back seat of a car with my 2 children. My son was 9 years old and my daughter was 10 months old. And afterwards, we basically were taken hostage by the killer. And then the police didn't know who had done what, so we were all arrested. He, in order to save himself, testified that my husband and I were the killers rather than himself, and we were sent to death row. Now, at the time, I was the only woman with a sentence of death in the United States, so I was put into solitary confinement in the women's maximum security prison in a building separate from all of the other prisoners, where I was kept in a small cell with a solid metal door. There were 6 steps from the door to the toilet facility, and I could reach out my arms and touch both walls. There was a metal shelf on one side with a thin mattress, which was my bed, and the only other things that I had in the cell with me was a law book and a Bible. And I got out of my cell only twice a week for a brief shower, and then a few minutes outside in a courtyard with a guard who didn't speak to me because the guards were under orders not to speak to me, and I wasn't allowed contact with any other prisoners. So I was actually in total solitary confinement and isolation. Now, the law book was incomprehensible to me at the time, but the Bible was a book of wisdom, and I did use that every day I just open it to any page, and it always seemed to say something that I needed to hear. At first I was very angry and fearful and confused. I just paced my cell back and forth, then one day they delivered me a tray, which of course you didn't know what the food was on the tray. You couldn't distinguish it. I always get my tray last, and it was always cold. But this one day I got beetroot on my tray, and I thought, what a beautiful color, because there is no color in a dark death row cell. And I thought, I could put that on my lips and make kisses on my letters, and it would be so nice. So I did. I put kisses on my letters to my children and to my husband, and then I thought, if I could paint, if I had a paintbrush. But what is a paintbrush? Why, it's just hair. So my hair had grown very long while I was in there. So I took some of my hair and I dipped it in the beetroot, and I started painting with it on my letters, and it was amazing what that did for me. It was so freeing and so good to be able to express myself. And then one day I read something in the Bible that said to me that they don't get to say when I die. And I realized that until they did figure out that they'd made a mistake and send me home, or for some strange karmic reason that I didn't understand, did take my life, until such time my life still belonged to me. And I had a choice. I could live whatever was going to be the rest of my life in fear and anger and misery, or I could choose to live it in hope. And so I choose hopefulness over hopelessness. I chose to believe that there was God, so there was something more powerful than them. And I started doing yoga, meditation, and prayers. And I basically turned my cell into a sanctuary. And I started to see everything differently. I started to see the guards as my servants rather than my captors. After all, they brought me my food, and they did my dishes for me, and they cooked for me, and they did my laundry, and I was excused from all work. All I had to do was my spiritual work, while they took care of my basic needs. And I began to see myself as a spiritual being here on my journey. And it followed then that so were they spiritual beings here on their journey. And I realized I'd rather actually have my journey than theirs. So I began to see everything differently. I spent the next 5 years sentenced to death. After that, my sentence was changed, and I spent a total of 17 years in prison until finally I was released after proving my innocence. And they told me to have a nice life, and I thought that my troubles were over when I was released, but actually a whole new set of problems was beginning because I wasn't prepared to deal with the outside world, having spent most of my adult life in prison. And so I couldn't get a job. I had no money and nowhere to live. I went to live with friends, and I employed myself teaching yoga because yoga had gotten me through the worst times in my life. So I used yoga to get through that as well. Yoga, meditation, and prayer. And after a while, my children, who'd grown up by then, came to live with me. And we couldn't go back, we realized. We couldn't go back and celebrate all the holidays we missed, or bandage their knees, or celebrate their graduations. But what I could do was give them a legacy of hope and the sure knowledge that no matter what happens in life, you can pick yourself up and choose whether to look behind you and feel sorry for yourself, or whether to look forward and believe in hope rather than hopelessness. But the main ingredient was forgiveness. I realized for myself that unless I could forgive those who had lied and sent us to death row, that I would not have room inside myself for love and joy and happiness. Peter and I came from two completely different worlds. I was in America and Peter was in Ireland. I was marching with the Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing, and we were marching through Texas against the death penalty. And the Irish contingency of Amnesty was there, and they heard me speak and invited me to come to Ireland to their AGM. And so I was so excited about coming to Ireland because I'd never been anywhere because I'd been locked up most of my adult life. And so I told a friend, and he had been to Ireland, and he said, "Oh, when you go to Ireland, you should meet Peter Pringle." And I said, "Okay." He didn't tell me anything about Peter. And so when I went to Ireland, someone else told me you should meet Peter Pringle. So they gave me his number, and I called him, and I asked him if he'd come to my talk when I came through his area, and he said he would. So he came with two friends, and he seemed to be very sensitive to my needs, helped me to find the room and to clear the room with my energy, and he said he'd sit up front so I'd have a friendly face to look at. And every time I looked at him when I was doing my talk, he was crying, and I thought, wow, I'm really having an impact on this man. I need to speak to him afterward, and he wanted to speak to me afterward too. I could tell because he was waiting at the door. Anyway, as it turned out, he took me sightseeing. We went to all the most beautiful places. And then we were crossing the Shannon River on a ferry boat, and I asked him, "Well, what is your interest in all of this?" And he told me that he'd been imprisoned, that he'd been wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death for killing policemen, just like me. Couldn't believe it. And then he told me he did yoga and meditation to get through. And then I knew that we were meant to meet. I could hear the little spirit guide saying, "Did she get it yet?" And so that was the beginning. That's how we met. And we found we had more and more in common. We spent the first evening talking about forgiveness.
And on the first evening we were spent together, we discussed forgiveness, because forgiveness is very important to both of us, and both of us had individually decided that we would follow a path of forgiveness and healing and reconciliation rather than a path of anger and bitterness. And so we were strongly bound together by these emotional and spiritual ties. Our relationship grew into a loving relationship, and so we've been living together since. And some 4 years ago we got married, and we lived together in the west of Ireland in this beautiful spot. And we established a foundation called the Sunny Centre Foundation. The website is the sunnycentre.com. And the Sunny Centre is actually in our home on the west coast of Ireland, where we host ex-prisoners, people who have come out of prison, been wrongly convicted, and who have great difficulty fitting into society. And so we help them as best we can. And they can come and stay with us in a loving, caring environment where they eat organic food and have animals around them. We have cats and dogs and goats and hens. And they can find recovery and spiritual renewment of themselves, to help them to face into society after their terrible ordeal. And we're blessed to be able to do this work together, because not only are we helping other people, but they're helping us too. And we find that actually the biggest task we have is to listen. You know, the skill of listening is a very important skill and needs to be learned. And so we listen to their stories, and they know they can share with us because they know we have been where they have been. We've experienced what they've been experienced, and so they're able to be open to us, and we engage with them, and they can go back to their world renewed in themselves to face into society again.
Anne founded Seeds of Hope, an organisation that facilitates storytelling based on the Troubles through music, art, drama, writing and sport. In Seeds of Hope, creativity is a tool for communication for those of differing viewpoints and backgrounds, and a language through which the silent may speak out. Set up the Seeds of Hope project to try and bring peace to these guys who were killing each other and bombing each other. She went to prisons in LA and did so much work with gangs. She did stuff that most of the other people wouldn't have done. She did work with the drugs rehab centres in Dublin, the prisons in Dublin, the prisons in Belfast, the schools. She set up a schools project in Belfast to bring the communities together, you know, through art and drama. When Anne needed something, she got it done. was the most amazing, loving, fun-loving, life-giving. Everything she did was life-giving. Everything. There was a lot of trauma in her life, but out of her trauma, she turned it into something positive. These are my mum's words.
Forgiveness isn't something that's talked about with reconciliation, but it's needed to bring closure to the pain and suffering experienced in Northern Ireland. You can't contemplate hope unless you address despair. To heal the wounds of Northern Ireland, I believe you have to see humanity in the face of the enemy. But forgiveness is a journey. Today you can forgive, and tomorrow you can feel pain all over again. But for me, forgiveness is about grace. To be able to forgive someone who has hurt you is a moment of grace. My mother is a driving force. She has such a respect for every single soul, even for the policemen and soldiers who raided our house and caused her so much pain. I grew up in County Derry in a very happy family, one of 4 sisters and 7 brothers. I just started nursing when my father and 3 of my brothers were interned without trial. It was this that got my other brothers involved in the Troubles. In the hospital intensive care unit, I would nurse victims from all sides. Seeing them lying there naked and attached to life support machines, I didn't see a uniform. I just saw their hearts and their pain. The conflict was everywhere, on the streets, in people's houses, at the end of your bed during night raids, when you'd wake up to find uniformed men in your room. My brother Dominic was murdered in front of his young son, who had previously, with his other young brother, seen his mother shot as she bathed them. I absolutely loved my brothers. I didn't judge them at all. With the Seeds of Hope project, we encourage people not to judge others. We listen to people's stories, but we don't judge them. There's healing in that. The idea is that when you hear my story and I hear your story, it becomes our story, and the seeds of hope are sown.
In 1995, I was sent to prison for a crime I did commit. This is my story. It was a Friday night. I was at home with my mum Winnie and my neighbour Aunt Eula. I put the telly on, and Crime Monthly comes on. And Crime Monthly is a programme which appeals for some of Britain's most wanted criminals to hand themselves in. And they're talking about a demonstration I'd been on a few months before, which was to shut down the British National Party headquarters in Welling, South East London. And then, bang! There's a picture of me as suspect number 3. Oh God, Charlie boy, you better run, boy, run! Leave the country, oh God! Oh Jesus, I told you not to go on that demonstration, but you never listened to your mother. Hail Mary, full of grace, Lord is with you, blessed art thou among women, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us and us now and at the office coming. I've spoken to Jesus, and you're not going to prison. Now go to sleep and we'll talk about it in the morning. Arrested the next morning, I had to wait nearly 2 years before I was sentenced, during which time I volunteered at a holiday home for people with severe disabilities. While I was there, I met a police officer who was injured on duty, which had left her paralysed. I asked her if she hated the person who did this to her, and she replied no, because there's too much hate in the world.
In September 1995, I pleaded guilty to a charge of riot and was sentenced to 16 months imprisonment.
I was taken down from the court, and being locked in a prison van was very claustrophobic and difficult to breathe. When we got to the prison, the gates opened like castle gates. The most humiliating part of the reception process was having to strip for the prison officers, and showing them my foreskin felt like I was being sexually abused. Then having to wear the prison uniform, which didn't fit and smelt terrible. The prison ring was like you see in the films, with heavy steel doors and mesh along each level to stop people dying. Painting allowed me to escape from the claustrophobia of being locked up.
When I got a letter of support from British Holocaust survivor Leon Greenman, the humanity and dignity was precious.
In his book, An Englishman in Auschwitz, Greenman describes his arrival in Birkenau. The women were separated from the men. Elsie, Leon's wife, and Barney, son, were marched about 20 yards away to a queue of women. I tried to watch Elsie. I could see her clearly against the blue lights. She could see me too, for she threw me a kiss and held our child up for me to see. What was going through her mind I will never know. Perhaps she was pleased that the journey had come to an end. We had been promised that we could meet at the weekends after our work was done. We will have a lot to talk about, I thought to myself. Elsie, her grandmother and Barney were sent straight to the gas chambers. Leon's last sighting of them was as they were taken away in an open truck. Elsie had made capes with peaked hoods for herself and Barney from bright red velvet curtains. Leon saw the 2 splashes of red. He called out, but his wife never heard him or looked back.
Stop wasting your life away. Come on, stop drinking your life away. Sick of you being a monster and a clown. You sing my praises and you're putting me down. Drinking every day. The devil stole your soul away. Drinking every day. The devil stole your soul away. Suppressing your feelings in a bar every night, and coming home looking to start a fight. I so despise you put down self-pity and lies. You put down self-pity and lies. We never got to play in those dark drinking days. We never got to play in those dark drinking days. 'Cause your alcoholic love took you away. 'Cause your alcoholic love took you away. Such a difficult one, has destroyed the bump disease no more. I won't be chained to this disease no more. I won't be chained to this disease no more. I won't be chained to this disease no more. 'Cause love is the key that will set me free. Love is the key that will set me free. Love is the key that will set me free. Love is the key that will set me free.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can. And the wisdom to know the difference.
Got sinking thinking running through my brain, driving me insane. Crippled with fear and shame, I'm sick and burning with pain. Got sinking thinking running through my brain, driving me insane. Crippled with fear and shame, I'm sick and burning with pain.
Scarcity no match for creativity in Gaza. Nothing stops true artists from creating, even when basic supplies such as paints, charcoal, pencils and chalk are nowhere to be found. In Gaza, which has struggled under an ongoing Israeli blockade and 3 wars in 6 years, enterprising Palestinians use unconventional materials to create art, even cosmetics and spices. Nearly 2 million people in Gaza Strip are packed into a space of 360 kilometres, about twice the size of Washington, D.C., and the border crossings are typically shut to all but a relative handful of fortunate people and selected goods by the Israeli army. As a result, the high rate of poverty discourages interest in buying art, since it's not a priority, and art supplies are very expensive when they do make it in. In the Al Amal neighbourhood of the Gaza Strip city of Khan Yunis, Kholoud Eldasoki started using makeup and hairspray as a replacement for paints and other materials which she couldn't find in local markets.
When I started to search for colours to paint, I couldn't find them in the market. A single colour has a variety of shades. In countries like Egypt and Iran, you can find an infinite number of shades at all times. But in Gaza, there are few supplies like chalk and pastels. And what I could find was very expensive, ranging from $250 to $300 or more per box. I used to ask my sister's husband to get them from Egypt on his travels since they are much cheaper there.
Then, Kholoud had the idea of raiding an old makeup kit given to her by her mother for items like lipstick, eyeliner, foundation powder and eyeshadow to use for drawing and adding colour. She also found that hairspray works in place of fixative when applying colours on top of charcoal sketches to prevent them from blending.
I experimented many times with different cosmetics, from lipstick to eyeshadow to eyeliner. The texture of makeup is almost the same as chalk and pastel, so I started to get used to and like the feeling and texture of makeup in my art.
To depict an old person, with wrinkles all over his face, Kholoud uses a charcoal pencil and then coats the drawing with hairspray. For her paintings of women, she often uses maroon lipstick for the face, eyeliner and foundation powder for facial details, and beige eyeshadow for the remaining details.
I focus on a variety of themes in my paintings, but most frequently I depict Palestinian women because they are victims of violence and marginalization, and society doesn't appreciate their sacrifices. One of the biggest challenges I face is making statues of people, which is prohibited in Islam. Although painting them is allowed, some still believe it is prohibited to draw people or even photograph them. So I change their features, like leaving out the pupil of the eye and adding wrinkles on the face of a woman to represent the Palestinian cause through her patience. In the future, I'd like to earn a scholarship for a master's degree in art therapy. Art therapy helps relieve mental disorders, offering both psychological and physical treatment. Adults and children suffer from many psychological issues and traumas that need to be addressed. Such stresses can gradually cause cancer, heart diseases, blood pressure, and diabetes.
The bad economic situation and repeated assaults may challenge Gaza's artists, but it doesn't hold them back. Necessity is truly the mother of invention.
What is your art about?
Love is my message. Love as a basic value and instinct of human beings before the pollution of societies. It is the real beauty and the proof of the existence of life. I hope anyone who stops in front of one of my paintings can feel my love. This is what my message is about. Being an artist is hard work.
Do you have doubts and struggles?
I am lucky that God gave me this talent. My ability to paint calms me and offers me a peaceful state of mind.
Do you ever regret becoming an artist? Where does your energy come from?
I think that an artist can be more sensitive and influential than other people, even though that this quality might be a challenge in daily life. All circumstances push an artist to express their emotions. Each artist gets different sources of inspiration and creation. Mine is a deep sadness, but nonetheless, I am glad to express it in my art.
How much satisfaction do you get in response of your work?
I never see a limit to my ambition. I feel myself always full of new ideas and new feelings to offer through art.
Has the conflict that is raging in Syria had an impact on the core element of your art? What has changed?
Syria, my homeland and my big love, is living through such painful issues. I try to share this pain through the choice of my colours. My most recent art pieces are called Damascus and Aleppo, and they are my best artworks and among the closest ones to my soul.
You are living outside of Syria. Has the place you're living in changed your art?
I am living in the United Arab Emirates. It is my second country, which is a beautiful one, giving me the energy to work and become distinguished. But Syria still remains the most beautiful place on earth with its wonderful nature. An artist has this great capacity to integrate to any place they want to because creation is their first target.
What inspires you?
Maybe this deep sadness appears in the detail of my paintings, of my heroes. I do not hate that sadness. I even like it, because any expression must go out from a real internal wound to be the base of creation.
What are your hopes and dreams for yourself as an artist, and especially as a Syrian artist?
There are no limits to my dreams. I hope that my art will be understood and will touch more people to draw happiness into their souls. I hope that my message of beauty and love will be released. Love is emotion, nostalgia, colour, movement. It is a spiritual purification and a reason to be alive, and the only way to make this world a better place.
Revenge, fear, self-pity and ego stole my wings away. Ubuntu's love is for giving back my